John chapter 18. I want to look at a message this morning, a passage, and I've been surprised. Another confession: I wasn't real comfortable myself when with preaching through the Gospel of John on Sunday mornings, but I just felt like that was what God was leading me to do, and so I came kicking and screaming along. I don't think I may have preached through a little book like Jude or something on Sunday mornings. I've taught through them on Wednesday nights, but to actually preach through a book on Sunday mornings I had never done before. And I have been amazed, for me anyway, at how God has, through no planning of my own. I haven't sat down and thought, okay, on New Year's Day I want to be at this text. I just took them as they come, verse by verse. And there's a huge advantage to that. It's really being emphasized more and more now in the church to pastors to preach through books, because it forces us to preach on topics that sometimes we might skip around. Every preacher, whether they even realize it or not, has a few topics that they prefer. And they will preach on those topics regularly. But by preaching through the book, you have to take whatever God laid. A good friend of mine, matter of fact, I know two different friends. I have two different friends who were preaching through other books, and those books have lengthy sections on divorce, and they had to deal with them. And one of the pastors actually had two ladies who in the church who had been divorced who got up and walked out the Sunday he was preaching on divorce. And later they did come back and they worked it out. But you have to deal with the topics that are there that way. And I've been amazed at how, by just taking it text by text, how well it kind of fits with where we are in the seasons, what's going on in the world at the time. And this passage this morning is no exception to that. As we look in this passage, my topic this morning is the risk of being religious. The risk of being religious. As we go into a new year, and as I mentioned a moment ago, again, a new, not just a new year. This is a new year, as all of us know, like no other. We're going into this new year completely blind. We just have no idea what this year holds. We just don't know. And I've been picking on Archie. Archie got the shot this week. And so I'm watching to see if he grows a horn out of his forehead or anything, and we'll decide from there how safe this shot is. If he grows an extra ear or something like that, we'll know that the shot's not safe. But we don't know what the future holds. And this passage this morning that we look at addresses an issue that I think is extremely important for the church in times such as these. And again, that is the risk of being religious. We're moving into the section of John now that deals with the arrest and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And I remind you that as we enter into that passage, enter into this section of Scripture, that it was the religious people who spearheaded the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. It was the ultra-religious, not just your average, everyday religious people, but the most religious people of the time, the religious leaders themselves. The Pharisees were the ringleaders of the crucifixion of Christ. And so there is a serious risk to being religious instead of being spiritual. Instead of following Jesus Christ, many people, their objective is to be religious. Well, I would remind you that Buddhism is a religion. I would remind you that the Mormonism is a religion. You can be religious and still be wicked. You can be religious and still be mean. And hold on to your hat, you can be religious and still bust hell wide open. Religion is not what we were ever called to be. We were called to be followers of Jesus Christ. We were called to be Christ-like. We were called to be obedient to Scripture, not just simply to be religious. Some of the greatest crimes, some of the greatest misery that has ever been brought about in this world has been brought about in the name of religion. And so there is a serious risk to being religious. And I want to look this morning at the beginning kind of the story of the crucifixion and the arrest, and pick it up and look at four things that we see there, the risk of being religious. Let me insert here one thing as we pick up in John chapter 18. We're actually picking up a little bit in the middle of the story. We're going to be beginning in verse 28 this morning, but John picks up with these words that they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. What he really doesn't include there, even though when he says they led him from the house of Caiaphas, he hints at it, but he doesn't describe the events there that had went on. When Jesus was first arrested, he was taken before the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin was a ruling body, a governing body of 70, who was again, basically, again, the town council, the religious council of the time. And they had already in their minds, in their perverted way, tried Jesus Christ and found him guilty and sentenced him to death. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for Jesus, they didn't have that authority. The Jews of the time were under Roman influence, Roman control. And I've talked about this before. The Romans in the areas that they took over largely allowed the people to pretty much do as they pleased as long as they paid taxes. They could continue to have their local government. They could continue to more or less do whatever they chose as long as there were a couple kind of basic rules. Pay taxes. Don't start up a ruckus that might ultimately affect Rome. I used to substitute some in the high school, and I would go into the classroom and they'd ask me, "What are we doing today?" And I was probably the worst substitute ever. I would walk and say, "I don't care. I don't care. Just don't burn the school down. Don't do anything that gets the attention of the teachers on either side of us. Otherwise, I don't care what you do. I've already got my diploma. I don't care if you learn anything. Just don't bother me. I've brought some books I'm going to read. Don't throw anybody out the window. Don't set the trash cans on fire. And we'll get along. I was kind of Rome to those kids. That's the way Rome was. Don't stir up a fight, pay taxes, and we'll be good. The other thing they could not do was they could not issue or carry out. They could issue it, but they could not carry out the death penalty. And there were several reasons for that. One of them, again, if they're dead, they don't pay taxes. And so Rome would not allow the nation, in this case Israel, the Jews, to actually carry out the death penalty. They could issue it, they could call for it, but it had to be carried out, and the final execution by the Romans. So after their make-believe trial of their system. They take Jesus then, and that's where we pick up in this text. They lead Jesus to Pilate so that they can get him to basically give his stamp of approval and execute Jesus Christ. And so that's where we're picking up here today. And they've got Jesus now. They've led him to Pilate. And Pilate was in town, and they led him to Pilate for his, again, final approval on an execution. And we pick up there with that. We see that it was early morning. And it says, they themselves did not enter into the praetorium or the governor's house. The governor's headquarters is the way it operated. The way they operated was wherever the governor was his headquarters. That was, it's kind of like, you hear sometimes today, President Trump, when he's at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, I think they call that the Florida White House. Pretty much wherever the president is, that's where the White House is. Well, wherever the governor was, that was where that was considered his headquarters. That was considered the courtroom, the office of the governor. And we read here that it says that they themselves they wouldn't enter into those headquarters because they did not want to be defiled. Now, we're talking about this morning the risk of religion. I want you to consider for a moment the first risk of religion as we look at that statement. They have just had a trial. Again, John doesn't record it. Matthew and Luke record the details more clearly of their trial that they had that violated just a laundry list of Jewish law of how a trial was to be conducted and how a defendant was to be treated. They had violated practically every law that they had. They had arrested an innocent man. They had brought him in. They had this trial. They had abused him already. They had ridiculed him and made fun of him. And now when they bring him to Pilate, they won't actually go into his headquarters. If you read carefully the Gospel of John, you will notice the movement of Pilate. It keeps saying Pilate came in, Pilate went out. Pilate came in, Pilate went out. Pilate wasn't even going to argue with them about this situation. So rather than make them come in, he goes out to where they are to hear their accusations against this man Jesus. And when he gets out there, the reason he has to go out, it says, is because the Passover was coming and they did not want to defile themselves by going in to Pilate's home, which would have been or courtroom, which would have been under Gentile control, could have possibly even had images of other gods, of Roman gods set up. And so the Jewish priests said, we won't go into that room because we don't want to defile ourselves. Does anybody see in that description the irony or the hypocrisy of their position? We don't mind having a jacked up trial on make-believe charges to execute a man. We're cool with that. We'll go ahead and we will do that, but we won't go in that room right there. We won't enter into that Gentile building. Oh, we'll kill a man, but we won't go into that. I don't know if you call that ironic or hypocritical or just downright mean. I'm not sure, or all three. But they didn't mind doing that. That is the risk of being religious. First of all, they had distorted priorities. Religion will cause us to have distorted priorities. If you have been involved and been around the church very often or very long, you know that many times the religious folks, we can get some messed up priorities. We get
confused on what really matters in the world. You think about, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. I don't need to hear your story because I've heard them all before. You think about some of the fights and arguments that have been held in churches over the years. What color carpet to buy, what kind of hymnals to buy, what songs to sing, whether to have drums, whether not to have drums, whether to have a guitar, what time to meet, how often to meet, what day to meet, on and on. Should we wear coat and tie? Can the women wear makeup? Can the women wear pants? You think, am I wrong? Should we play cards? Should we dance? Should we go to the movie theater? You think about the things that have been priority in the church in your lifetime. Anybody in here? I'm not going to ask you for a story. Anybody in here ever seen that situation where our priorities? We have that where we get all caught up in again. Where that's my seat. It's too loud. It's not loud enough. It's too hot. It's too cold. Can you believe she wore that to church? We have all kinds of priorities. One of the risks of religion is we get very religious and we get more concerned about our priorities than we are about the priorities of God. That's a real risk of being religious. And believe me, I have heard it over and over throughout the years. Not just in this church, but any time you're around church people, you will hear what is important. I can think of a church not too far from here who began a ministry, and they began to reach some of the poor children in their neighborhood. And this church happens to be in a poor neighborhood. If you're going to reach your neighborhood, they're going to be poor. And yet one of the very influential members of that church stood up in a business meeting, and if I'm lying, I'm dying, stood up and said, "We don't want that kind of people in our church." Religion can cause us to have the wrong priorities. We'll get concerned about the wrong things. These religious leaders were more concerned about going into a Gentile building than they were executing an innocent man. All in the name of religion. Listen, that's what it boils down to. They executed Jesus in the name of religion. What he was doing interfered with the way they had always done it. I know none of you have ever heard that phrase in the church. If you haven't, let me know, and I will forward you an email or two, or a letter or two, or a phone call or two, or 10 or 12. That's not the way we have always done it. Listen, religion will cause us to have the wrong priorities. The church, again, I mentioned a moment ago the condition of the church. As we move forward into a new day, into a changing world, one we're probably not going to like, to be very honest with you. One I'm already not real happy about. Y'all hadn't seen it. If you couldn't read it when I was wearing it, it says, "I hate wearing this." Yes, it's got the Grinch, and yes, it's after Christmas, but the message works. I hate wearing this. We're moving into a different world. If we're going to succeed as followers of Jesus Christ, if we're going to move forward as a church, then our priorities have to be the same priorities as God. What's important to us must be what's important to God. What's important to God is the lost man down the street. I know what we've always done. I know what we like. I know our habits. I know the things that we're comfortable with. But the fact is, if what we are doing doesn't reach people for Jesus Christ, then maybe we've got the wrong priorities. Again, I'll just use this one because it's a common occurrence. What does an argument over the color of carpet do to reach one person for Jesus? Most of you in here are old enough that you came to know Christ probably in a building that didn't even have carpet or air conditioning. But we spend a whole lot of time arguing over what color the carpet and what the thermostat's going to be set on. Who's going to teach what class, what room they're going to get. This is my room. This is our room. Those are the things we argue about. Do you see there's not much difference in us and the priorities that the Pharisees had? Oh, we're not going in that room, but we'll kill a man. The risk of distorted priorities. And then it tells us why. It says they wouldn't go into that room because the Passover was coming up. Look there in that verse again. And they didn't want to be defiled and not be able to eat the Passover. Not only do they have distorted priorities, they've got a disturbing problem. They were more concerned here about being part of the Passover feast. Again, the hypocrisy, the irony of this text is amazing. By this point in time, the Jews already had set aside their Passover lamb. They already had all the preparations ready for the Passover feast. And yet, they are about to execute the Passover lamb. They're about to execute Jesus Christ. Their concern was they didn't want to be defiled. Why? Because they didn't want to miss out on the Passover meal. Think about that for a minute. Their priorities, they have a disturbing problem here in that their convictions. These men were, they were nitpicky careful about following every little rule, every little, not just biblical rule, but the rules that they had made up so that they could stay ceremonially clean, so they could eat the Passover. Listen, they had a problem here. Their priorities were messed up. They were more concerned about the ceremony than the Savior. They were more concerned about the meal than the Master. They were more concerned here about their reputation. We don't want to be seen in the Gentile hall. They have a disturbing problem, but as we go on, we see the other risk of being religious. Look with me. What it boils down to is their destructive pride. Look in verse 29. So Pilate goes out to meet them, and he says, what's the charge? What accusation? In verse 29. What do you bring against him? And in verse 30, you see there a couple things. You see, first of all, kind of their sarcasm. You see their disrespect for Pilate. And you see their lack of a real charge against Jesus. Because what they say here is they say if he wasn't doing evil, we wouldn't have brought him to you. And they call him, the word in the King James here is they call him a malefactor. That means he was spreading evil. And so Pilate asked them, what charge do you bring against this man? And their basic answer was this: just trust us.
If you look closely, they don't have a charge. They don't say he robbed the bank. They don't say he was selling drugs. They don't say he murdered anyone. They don't have a specific charge. The word malefactor means that, again, he was just going around encouraging evil. No charge, no specific charge, which in itself is a violation of their law. No charge, just, well, he's a bad guy. You know what would happen even in America in 2021 if you went into court and the judge says, what's the charge? And the DA stood up and said, well, he's a bad guy. He's just been doing bad stuff. Now, if the judge was particularly in a good mood that day, he might say something to the effect of, well, like what? But more than likely, if the DA stands up in a courtroom and says, he's just a bad guy, I'm going to say there's quite a good chance that the DA is going to jail for contempt. I expect at the very least the judge is going to chew him out. He's a bad guy. Can you imagine a police officer pulling you over and putting on that little pink slip? Well, they're not even pink anymore. They print them out of a computer. Putting on that ticket, I just didn't like the way he was driving. You ever got a speeding ticket? What does that speeding ticket say? That speeding ticket will say they were doing 67 in a 55. It will and then it'll put in violation of general statute, and it'll give the number. There'll be a specific charge. But these folks went to court and said, we just don't like the way he's been acting. Kill him. But they wouldn't go in the courtroom because they didn't want to be defiled. Do you see what happens here? Pay close attention. Again, John doesn't record it for us. But they've already had their make-believe Jewish trial, and they found him guilty. And they've declared that he should die for his sins. Die for his evil. And so when they come before Pilate, they come before him and simply say, trust us. See, here's what you need to know. They went to Pilate and they asked Pilate, but they didn't like Pilate. It made them mad that they had to go get permission from Pilate to execute this man. They were angry about it because in their minds they were the religious leaders, and their decision was good enough. They look at Pilate and say, well, if he wasn't doing evil, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Just trust us, Pilate. Just stamp the paper. Just sign it. Whatever it was they had to do. Just because we said so, you kill him. You see their pride in that statement? You don't need to know. You're about to take a man's life, but just sign the paper. You don't need to know the reason. We're God's representatives. We are the religious leaders. Just sign the paper and crucify him. Get rid of him. Just go ahead and take care of it. The risk of being religious is dangerous pride. If we're not careful in the church, if we're not careful as religious people, we will find ourselves looking down on those who don't know Christ. We'll find ourselves looking down on those around us, those who are not as religious as us. We will find ourselves in a position of looking at those who may come into church who are not dressed in a way that we approve of, or maybe their hair is not cut in a way we approve of, or maybe their just general appearance isn't what we would approve of, and we look at that person and we demean that person based on their looks, based on their dress. Well, they're not as religious as me because I got all dressed up when I come to church today. Yeah, but unfortunately you're like the Pharisees. You put a nice coat and tie, a nice dress on a pig. Pardon the expression. You know what you got if you put a nice suit on a pig? A pig in a suit. And if you turn that pig loose, you know where he's going? Right back to the slop, right back to the mud in your fine suit. Anybody in here ever dealt, you know, in your heart, in your mind, you ever had any contact, ever dealt with somebody who maybe they didn't look like they were all that? I don't know how to say that nicely, but let's just be honest. Maybe they didn't dress right. Maybe they you know, maybe they smelled. Maybe they weren't able to get a bath, whatever. But their heart, they had a heart of gold. They loved the Lord. Anybody in here ever run into somebody in a fine three-piece suit that was mean as the devil himself? Anybody in here ever run into anybody that had an office in the church? Might have been a deacon, might have been the preacher that was just mean and nasty. Which one do you think God's more pleased with? These guys have pride. Their pride. You have to be very careful with religion. Religion will lead you down a road of pride, where you begin to think, well, I'm better. I'm closer to God. I'm this, I'm that. Religion can make you proud. The fourth risk of religion, and we see it demonstrated by these men. In verse 31, Pilate knew the rules. Pilate tells him, he says, well, take him and judge him by your own law. Well, Pilate knew what they wanted. Pilate knew they wanted him dead, but that they couldn't carry it out. And so they said to him, it's not legal, it's not lawful, we can't put him to death. And this was to fulfill the prophecy that Jesus had said. See, if the Jews would have done it on their own, the Jews would have stoned him. That was their method of execution. The Romans crucified. The Bible had already said that he would be crucified. And so the Jews here were playing right into his hands. Look what they say. The final risk of religion I want you to see is the deceptive pretense. They wanted this man put to death, and they wanted him put to death by crucifixion. They wanted him to die. a painful, horrible death. They wanted this man who claimed to be God to die under the curse of God. They wanted Pilate to say he's guilty. But Pilate plays dumb, and he won't do it. He says, you crucify him, you kill him, you execute him, you do whatever you're going to do. They put on this show, this dog and pony act of going to Pilate and saying, oh, Pilate, we like you, and listen, the Jews, rightfully so, the Jews hated the Romans. Hey, I would too. If the Canadians come in and make us start paying taxes to Canada, I'm going to hate the Canadians. Yeah. I ain't real crazy about paying taxes to the Americans, let alone to another country. The Jews hated the Romans. But when it come to getting what they wanted, they'd lie like a dog. Pilate, we brought him to you. Boy, sugar wouldn't have melted in their mouth that night. See, religion will cause you to put on a show. Religion will cause you to put on an act. It'll cause you to act all holy on Sunday and live completely contrary to that on Monday. You don't have to read much of this story to know that these men who called themselves the religious leaders of Israel were rotten to the core. They were evil, they were mean, they were rotten. They hated Rome. But they would walk around giving the Israelites all kinds of rules they had to follow. They wanted to stay clean so they wouldn't go in the courtroom. But they didn't think twice about killing an innocent man. When asked to come up with a charge, they couldn't even come up with one. All they could say was, well, he's a bad guy. All in the name of religion. Folks, what the church, let me change that. What the world needs going forward is a lot less religion and a lot more Jesus. They need people who are a lot less concerned about Constitution and bylaws and committees and the way we've always done it and the way he said do it. That's the church this world needs going forward. I don't mean to be a pessimist, but as I look at where we are in America, as I look at the condition of the world, I don't see, to be very honest, a whole lot of bright spots. But folks, we were called to be the light, to take the light into the world. We were called to be the salt. The world doesn't need another religion. It doesn't need more religion. In fact, I could make a really good argument that much of what's wrong with us is religion. Much of what's wrong with America is that we are religious. We think we're in pretty good shape because we got a church on every corner. Because pretty much every house in the world's got a Bible or two. We think we're in good shape. Religion is part of our problem. Find me one line where we're ever called to be religious. And for every line you can show me that says we're called to be religious, I'll show you a dozen that says we're to be like Jesus. That's what we're called to be. Not religious, but Christ followers. Christ-like. That's who we're called to be. I want to ask you to bow your heads this morning. I want to challenge you this morning. To where you are, whether you're in this room, whether you're at home, to kneel, to come up here to the altar, however you want to do it. Sit in your chair. And to join with me in praying, Lord, don't make us more religious. Make us more like you. The world's had enough religion. It needs more Jesus. If you're here today and you don't know Jesus Christ, the question this morning is not, are you religious? The question this morning is not, do you hold an office in the church? The challenge this morning is not, do you go to church? But do you follow Christ? Do you follow His word? Are you obedient to Him? Quite frankly, I think the world is sick of our religion. But they're starving to see people who follow Jesus. If you don't know Him as your Savior this morning, would you come? If you're online, make a comment, send an email, we'll reach out to you. I'm not asking you, are you religious? I'm asking you, if you died today, would you go to heaven? I'm asking you, do you know Jesus? If the people who know you best, would they say you were religious? Or would they say you follow Jesus? There's a huge gap between the two. Father, we thank you this morning for your word. God, we ask you to take your word and use it this morning. To change us, to convict us, to speak to our hearts. God, not enough that we be religious, but that we be like you. That the world could see our love for you. God, don't let us be like these Pharisees who were concerned about religious practice, habit, ritual, more than they were about mankind. We thank you for what you're going to do here today, and we'll give you the glory for it all. For it's in Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen. As we stand together.
My journey fair, without him I would be drifting, like a ship without a sail. Jesus, oh Jesus, you know him today. Turn him away, oh Jesus, oh Jesus. Without him I'm lost, I would be.
All right, as we go out this morning, again, we told you a couple of weeks ago, we're not doing the boxed envelopes anymore. We don't need them. We don't need the numbers, and it costs a good bit to get those numbers put on there. We're not even using them. So Tommy has, or Carol, or Tommy and Carol, or maybe Angie, I'm not sure who, but you'll notice on the table back there are just some loose envelopes, but they're bundled up in some form or fashion. I don't know. You take some, you need some more, you can get some more, but they're back there. There's no difference. Some of them are plain white, and some of them are trimmed in red. If you like the red ones, take red ones. Again, are they different, Tommy, in the way they're bundled? Whatever he said. I said they're there, and you can get those. As we go out, I'm going to remind you, we're just kind of ongoing with the food. Second thing, I don't know exactly what to believe with all these numbers and all this corona and a new kind of corona and everything else. And I'm not going to say it's required. Y'all are grown. I'm going to encourage you as you come in and go out, slip on a mask. It's 50 feet. It won't kill you, in that far. And who knows, it might protect you or somebody else. I said, you do whatever you want to with Archie. He's had the shot. He's safe, he thinks. I said, slip on your mask. It won't, it can't hurt. I'm not going to fuss at you if you don't, but just an encouragement to, as you come in and go out, to put a slip on a mask as you go in and come out. Once you get outside in the great wide open, take it off and run a lap around the building if you want to. But I said that probably a good idea. I'm not sure how much difference it makes, but it's the only thing they've really told us to try. So I told Archie, I'll be very honest. When I put it on, I can still smell smoke through it, and so I'm pretty sure a virus can sneak through it. But I'll be nice and put it on. So even though it says I hate this thing. All right, let's bow as we dismiss this morning. Archie, how about dismiss us now? That's why I hate it.